then be able to see the speakers and the screen as well. Then that should be pretty fine. So something like this. Then so but the really good thing which I'll present now is the going to Tornio, Haparanda Tornio, was super good. Like loads of really interesting things.
I've been following your trip there, like interesting. It's kind of
no, like really good, interesting in a really good way. Like not interesting in a crazy way, like interesting in a really good way.
Yeah.
So, right. So, I'm good. I'm ready. So, you on with the stream already?
Not yet. But should I put it on also?
Yeah, you can
okay.
put it on.
Yeah.
Right, and then.
Ready, steady, go.
Right. So, do you want to say a word of introduction from Demos?
I did already.
Oh, right. Okay. So, so thank you all for coming to the event, and to those streaming and seeing online. There is one more person, Ronnie Patz, who I'm travelling with for 1 or 2 legs, who will be coming in and joining us at some point when he gets here with the bus. But the important point is I managed to get here faster with the bicycle than he could manage to do with the bus. What I'm going to do is then very quickly present this project and why I'm doing it, and then we can go on to some of the more kind of experience aspects with regards to taking trains. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over the laptops. So I've then got play in full screen. I'm just going to take yours out there and switch this over. And then right, here we
I
go.
actually have your slides on that laptop as well. Okay, but
Okay, here we go. Right, it'll go. Right, so the cross-border rail project, I'm going to explain what it is and why it matters. The link on the bottom there, you can also get the slides and the materials and eventually as I go, all of the photos and all of the data from everything that I make out of the project. What is the problem? Now, you probably know this perhaps a little bit less in Finland than in most other parts of Europe, because there are comparatively few cross-border railways from here for reasons that we'll talk about in a minute. But national railway systems in Europe work comparatively well, but once you cross a border on a train, everything becomes more complicated or more difficult. Infrastructure, service levels, ticketing, timetables are all of either poorer quality or more difficult the moment you try and cross a border with a train. So that's the crux of the problem I'm trying to highlight in this project. So how am I doing it? The cross-border rail project is to cross all of the internal borders of the European Union and Norway and Switzerland that you can cross by train in one 40-day journey. To highlight the problems and also, importantly, to propose solutions to those problems. Where there are no trains anymore, then I cross the border with a folding bicycle. That's actually just parked downstairs at the moment. I didn't pull it up here. And there are meetings with activists in every capital city en route, and indeed even meetings with activists in some other places as well, depending on what happens and who's there. So this is actually an early picture from earlier on in the project. This is the cross-border line between Nijmegen in the Netherlands and Kleve in Germany, and that's how it looks with all the flowers growing over it at the moment. So what are the I've gone too far. What are the specific issues? There are 4 different types of problems on the ground. In some places, cross-border tracks exist, but they've fallen into disrepair and can no longer be used. Right? So that's like the picture shown there, Nijmegen and Kleve. In others, tracks exist, but passenger trains do not run. That's what we've got at Tornio Haparanda, which I'll talk about in just a minute. In other places, timetables are poor. I'm going to talk about that one in a minute as well with a case in Belgium. And then also you have difficulty often with informational ticketing problems that make things complicated. So the train runs, but passengers have no idea when it runs or how to possibly even book it. So that's the final one. So those are the different types of problems which I'm encountering in each and every border. So let's talk about the first one, which is the tracks have fallen into disrepair. So this is one of those examples I've already found in the project so far. So you can see that's the France-Belgium border, close to Valenciennes. So you have here, it's not labelled there, but you have on the side Valenciennes, you have Aulnois at the bottom, and Mons up there at the top, so that's Belgium up at the top. And the grey line is what I cycled, and this part here, so basically you have this line, which is a freight line, which goes 13 kilometres to the border, and you see there's a gap, there's 2 kilometres of a gap there where the tracks have fallen into disrepair, which is just the bit that crosses the border, and then the yellow line, it then takes you on further to go towards Belgium. So what does that look like? Well, the tracks look like that at the moment, right? Nothing has run there for a long period of time. I did also upload a drone video onto Twitter as well, where you can see further along, there are massive trees growing over the line, like nothing can go there. This is the Belgian side. That there, past the sign, is literally the border, and you see the electrification wires end like right at the border. Now, you could reactivate this one comparatively easily, but to do so, you would need some new tracks, some investment in new tracks there. And why does this one matter is because the European Union Agency for Railways is in Valenciennes, and they would like a train to take their staff to Brussels, and they've been arguing about this for 15 years, and so they have to go on a crazy route around by Lille instead. So that was the reason I was there, was to meet the boss of the EU Agency for Railways. So if you sum up all of the problems and the headaches of cross-border rail in Europe, this is a good case to show how damn difficult it is to solve these things. Even the EU Agency for Railways can't get there and can't get this one fixed. Right. Now then, the most interesting one for you guys, so where I was yesterday is at the Tornio-Haparanda border. So what you've got here is the line that comes from Luleå through Calix to Haparanda. As you see here, a very slow winding line as far as Calix, and this part is all new, it was all reconstructed, and it goes really fast here. Yeah? You then get to the border, the tracks you can see still exist, but there are no passenger trains running, and then from Tornio-Haparanda you then have you can take the night train onwards. Now what does this one look like? Now this is an incredible place. So this railway station is wonderfully restored on the Swedish side. These are actually the Finnish gauge tracks. So for those non-railway people here, the gauge of the lines, distance between the lines in Finland is 1,524 millimeters, and in mainland Europe and in Sweden 1,435, so a difference. So what has happened here in Haparanda is this is where the Finnish trains would traditionally arrive, and the Swedish trains would depart from the tracks on the other side of the building. And you even have there are doors through in the building which tell you which country's train is going from which part, or no longer. Because at the moment there are only Swedish trains there are no Finnish trains there. This is Tornio station, which is quite interesting, but nevertheless not quite as grand as Haparanda's. Here on this side we have the Finnish tracks, and this is what the Swedish single one track looks like. So basically, if you want to solve this in one or other station, doing it in Haparanda makes more sense than Tornio. Your station infrastructure is better. That is the cross-border bridge, right, which still is in good shape, and that's what it looks like from the drone. I haven't done all the editing on this yet, but it is an extraordinary and wonderful spot to be there. It was the first time we'd seen sunshine in about 5 days on the project, so that kind of helped somewhat as well. But anyway, that's the border bridge, right? What's the crux here? Who wants to go there? All right. Now, the really important point for this one, and this is why going to these borders and seeing it on the ground makes a lot of sense, is this is massively more important. This cross-border connection is much more important for Oulu and Rovaniemi to go to Sweden than it is for any Swedes to go to northern Finland. Because basically, all of the total population of all of that part of northern Sweden is not anywhere near as important for the country or in terms of population for passenger rail as the Finnish side. Right? Now, with that in mind, and it also then gives those people from northern Finland a route to the rest of Europe's railway networks, if they wanted it, this then, based on looking at the infrastructure and assessing this as a cross-border route, should be how to improve that connection and make it active. So, you should electrify the Kemi to Haparanda line at 25 kilovolts, the Finnish standard electrification, because at the moment the electrification is, this here is all electrified, but the tiny extra bit of about 20-25 kilometers to Haparanda is not electrified. So put up Finnish standard overhead electrification as far as Haparanda. Run electrical multiple units, so small electrical trains from Oulu and Rovaniemi, join them together in Kemi. So you start one train here, another train there, you send them to Kemi, you join them together and you send them to Haparanda, right? And then in Haparanda, you then connect to the Swedish railway network. You could then connect with the Norrtåg service, which takes you to Boden and to Luleå on the Swedish side, and from there on to Stockholm. Now the important point is, before you get to Luleå, so at Boden, which is an important railway junction in northern Sweden, that is where the Narvik to Stockholm night train runs. So you could basically, with that route, pick up the night train that would take you onwards into Sweden. Now that would be, in terms of a plan, deliverable, achievable, not expensive. Finnish Railways already has adequate trains that you could use to do that. Basically, the only thing you've got missing is about 20 kilometers of overhead electrification.
Which has been decided already that it's going to get funding.
Actually, the building of it, the construction has begun.
Of the overhead electrified. So,
John, let's go there in the corner of the screen so you'll be better visible in the channel.
The crux of it, essentially, is there are some people that have advocated it doing the other way, running Swedish trains through to Kemi or something like that, but operationally speaking, based on where the passenger flows are and the state of the infrastructure, then you reassure me that that has already begun. So
it has begun, and because the normal gauge track ends in Tornio, so you would have to build a new railway.
To Kemi, yeah, exactly.
And there are some industrial lines for the electrification and so forth. I think, so that's, I'm not saying it's completely in the basket, but it's very far proceeding.
Right.
I think they said 24, it should be complete.
Yeah.
But then I think your second point is the bigger problem, because VR hasn't said anything yet that they would actually run any train there.
Right.
And the EMUs are pretty, older ones have been scrapped. And that's also the reason, scrapping is the reason why any diesel train can't run there, because they're basically all scrapped.
Right, yeah.
The coaches, they would be locals.
Right.
And so what would VR actually do if they started it? I assume they would continue some intercity coming from south to Oulu, and continue it to Haparanda.
Right, okay.
And then, of course, in addition to that, local traffic would make very much sense,
right,
to point out. But for the moment being, only VR itself can decide to run it, or the ministry. And the ministry has very little interest, unfortunately.
Right.
And the local authorities cannot do it. It's illegal.
Right, okay.
Except here in Helsinki.
Right, so here is a lever in order to manage to make it work. Couple it to Oulu 2026 European Capital of Culture. Right, so there is
has been trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I initiated that failed as a project, but I've not given up yet. Couple the EU's capitals of culture to the need to get there in a green manner. There is another European Capital of Culture 2025, Gorizia Novogorica, which also is missing a railway connection. So connecting railways to capital of culture and green campaigning is a useful lever in order to manage to make that move potentially, right? Medium term, the Swedes are also procuring new night train carriages as well. Now, whether that's possible to then extend a bit of the night train to Haparanda, right? Now, bear in mind, on the Swedish side, it is politically important, but there is no one there, right? Like in terms of the population, right? The train had 5 passengers in it going from Luleå to Haparanda. So I'm on a train going 200 kilometers an hour with 5 passengers on it, which is a bit insane.
On a Sunday.
No, but so I asked the train manager, so how high is the demand on this line? Is this normal? And she just said, yes. At the moment, the Swedes have built the infrastructure and have built a high-speed line there, so they have a political interest, right? So don't underestimate that. Now, getting this fixed is eminently doable, right? With enough political pressure here, right? And it's going the right way, and it's got to be done that way for people from northern Finland to get to Sweden. Finland ultimately needs this more than Sweden needs it. All right, now, and if you see it that way round, that's the lever, because all of these borders pretty much all of them, one side wants it and the other side doesn't want it. Now what you've got here is Finland wants and needs it, and Sweden's already delivered its bit, right? Which is a pretty rare circumstance actually, and quite a beneficial one.
Right? The only thing I think we need from Sweden is basically a small part of the finance for their side of that's how the governments work together anyway. That they have to finance their 1 kilometer of, or not big money anyway.
Right. They
have to widen the bridge a little bit and some technicalities like that, but it's doable. And then of course, a bit, once it hopefully starts to work and grow a bit, a more dense service.
Right. So it's very important though, you're not going to generate much non-through service, right? For just local traffic on the Swedish side, right? Okay, anyway, on from that one, because I'm using too much time. Let's talk about some of the other cases quickly. So, what about this one? This was when I was getting to Valenciennes, Mons to Aulnoy, right? This is a timetabling problem at this border. There is a line, a dual-track electrified line. It should work fine, right? And then the line that goes off the bottom of the map there eventually takes you to Paris, right? So this is an important connection potentially from southern Belgium to get people to Paris, or for cross-border commuters here, right? And it's an important connection for freight. What happened? Well, it's the very first train of the morning, 6:04 a.m. from Mons, right, is the international train. There's not a single other train that comes into Mons before the international train departs. So it basically connects with nothing. And it therefore means, surprise, surprise, I was literally the only passenger on the train. There was not a single other soul, right? Because basically, this is done as a political compromise in Belgium to say, look, we have a train, right? With no intention of anyone ever using it, which is a kind of absurd circumstance, but nevertheless is exactly what the situation is there. So you have and it's quite a reasonable train, right? It's relatively modern and comfortable and so on, and it's electric, but no one is using it because the timetable is awful. Now, very important here is the railway in somewhere like this, where it's about connecting the towns on either side of the border, you have to run a regular timetable because otherwise people don't rely on the train. If you have two big gaps in your timetable, imagine you lived in Aulnoy and your kids, well, you work in Aulnoy and your kids are at school in Mons, your kids suddenly fall ill and you need to go home to look after them, and the next train is in 9 hours, you would not rely on that train, right? You would instead buy a car and you hop in the car and drive home, right? I get that totally. So if you want to run a regional service where it's national or cross-border, you have to run it with a regular schedule, because otherwise no one is ever going to use it other than just purely for kind of tourist purposes. And so this one, the timetable is all wrong. Now, we know there is some change afoot here, but we don't know what yet about changing that. But it's a perfect demonstration of all of what's wrong, where the infrastructure is good, but the service is dreadful. And then the last one, if any of you have been following me on Twitter, the absolute nightmare of my entire project. Here's Ronnie, welcome. The absolute nightmare of my entire project has been routing through Sweden. So very, very important is you need clear and transparent information about what happens to an international service, also on the other side of the border. So trying to plan the Stockholm to Oslo route, right, which should come through here, through Karlstad, this way to Oslo. I first of all had a train, then I had a train with an alternative timetable, which had been re-timetabled because of engineering works, that I booked. Then it got cancelled, so for 4 days there was no train at all. And then eventually they reinstated it, but half as a bus, right? Now, the difficulty then is who you possibly trust to work out the information for booking something like that, not least because, surprise, surprise, it's the cross-border bit which was the first thing to get cut. Yeah? And then also, Norway cut all of its international railway connections for 15 months during the COVID pandemic, right? So what we've also seen all over Europe is buses have carried on running, planes have carried on running, cars have carried on driving, but trains have been cancelled. Now, what you've got to have, and Finland hasn't got this problem because it's essentially railway liberalisation has not really, to a great extent, happened here yet. You can have that argument if you want. But on the other side, in Norway, they have a state-based organisation called Entur that basically is the definitive source of information. If NTOR says it runs, it will run. If NTOR says it doesn't run, it will not run. Right? In Sweden, you have the situation that all of the organizations give responsibility to each other to work out whether it runs, and the first thing that then gets cut out is the bit for the international connection. So if liberalization of railways advances in Finland, make sure you don't copy the Swedish model. So that was an information problem, and those kind of information problems have beset my trip or my planning. So that's the train I should have taken, an old-style intercity. Also, the Swedes give their most rubbish old trains to go on the route to Oslo, while they actually run the super nice modern ones on the route to Gothenburg. So quite often this is the case, that how good or how kind of tight the service is on an international connection is also often comparatively worse. Because basically the Oslo train for the Swedes, well, that's a Norwegian problem, and for the Norwegians it's a Swedish problem. And so the head of the EU Agency for Railways, he calls it collective irresponsibility. Basically everyone's got a bit of responsibility, but no one's got the full responsibility, and therefore you don't end up solving the problems. So what's happening with the politics of it all? My demand is essentially a political one to the European Union institutions to fix a lot of this. These are cross-border issues, so the EU needs to step up in order to fix them and to move the focus away from only infrastructure investments. Now, I haven't really had one of these yet, right? But there will be as I go through the Baltic countries. The EU has renovated a lot of lines already in the Baltic countries and built a standard gauge line from Białystok in Poland to Kaunas in Lithuania, but no trains run there. So there are places all over Europe where the EU has invested in the tracks, but then the trains don't actually run. Now, what you've then got to do is make sure that the European Union would take a more kind of holistic approach to its railway policy altogether, and essentially step in to help solve some of those other problems, right? Or there's a situation in Spain where the line is electric, but they run diesel trains because no one thought to finance buying new electric trains to run on the EU finance line, right? These problems exist all over. So, and there are many simple solutions for these problems, right? So Tornio Haparanda, the solution is not particularly complicated from a technological point of view, and all over Europe there are very simple problems you could do right now in order to manage to solve many of these cross-border rail issues. So what I'm doing in a slightly sort of semi-silly way is I'm sending a daily postcard to the European Commissioner for Transport, literally a paper postcard sent from the place where I'm crossing the border, telling her what's going wrong with Europe's railways and what she ought to do to fix it. And then, how do you want to follow it? If you want to follow the project, there are daily Twitter threads on the hashtag #CrossBorderRail, summaries each morning and evening of what happened. And then route plans, maps and everything on the background are on the website of the project. There is also an enormous amount of photo and video material, which I'm admittedly struggling to process at the moment, trying to actually kind of get 1.5 gigabytes of video uploaded out of a train or a hotel is not the easiest thing to do. So that takes a few days after I've been somewhere to be able to upload it, but all of that will come as well. And any data I gather from the entire project will all be made available to anyone that wants it. I'm also including all the photo and video material. Right, so that is it. That is the Cross-Border Rail project and what I've learned so far from the situation in thus far. I'm on day 7, so I've got quite a long way to go. So that's all from me.
Great. Should we run right away? Yeah, I'm discussing the over in the end. Okay.
There you go.
Perfect.
It's coming.
It's coming.
It should be. Yeah, it's loading up.
Last time it worked fine, it's just a bit slow. You need my password.
Yeah, your password.
You can keep the stream for a second.
Perfect. So, hello everyone. My name is Jaakko Mustakallio and I'm a rail activist, enthusiastic rail traveler by myself and also a green politician here in Finland and a location from Tampere. Very good to hear your thoughts on the matter, and I really love to see all those graphic and photos that you've been there by yourself. I've been living this whole spring in Belgium, and I've been traveling with between Brussels and Strasbourg a lot in the spring, and I kind of especially that the border with the France and the Belgium side, it's been a pain, and in a way, yeah, I really hope that we can find good solutions for all of these. And John already noted the main characteristics of the problems in Europe, and I'm going to focus shortly on three topics. Which are the EU Commission role on the trip chain, and the second one is that Finland as an island, and the third one is going to be about the big visions that we need for the train traveling in the Baltic Sea region. But yeah, as stated that the first one, that if one wants to travel sustainably and want to go to Europe somewhere and to visit a relative or go to see some nice view, the sights somewhere, it takes a lot of time to kind of get up with the information where the trains go. And if you compare to that do you really if you would buy a flight ticket, do you go to every the air operators their own website and look there, and then you do the connecting things by yourself, and it's not nowadays that no one would think that would be necessary, but it is the necessity with the train traveling, and there it would be actually quite easy political solutions to make sure with the EU Commission that you could even make a service kind of the train Skyscanner or train Momondo or any of that kind of service would be. It wouldn't need anything else but a piece of law that would require the national train companies to open their data, to open their the system that they use, the data of the timetables, of the prices, of everything. That only that would be open. That single action would make possible for us to have a Skyscanner for trains in Europe. And then you could kind of the service operators could take the responsibility of that if one train is late or is cancelled or something, then that operator would be in charge of a rerouting or something like that. Only that kind of one thing. So why on earth it is so freaking difficult to get anything like this kind of simple legislation through in the EU Commission? I think there is at least a few reasons, but one of the main reasons is that the rail companies, which most of them have the background in as monopolies or governmental offices or something like that, they are not really, as John said, the liberalization of the train companies or the train traveling is quite low. So you have the situation that if you're a monopoly, you're not actually you're not that dependent on that if the service is always so good. And so the governments, they build the tracks are great, there are electrified tracks everywhere, there are some places that are not, but in a way you could increase by increasing some competition there, you would get the companies to in a way improve their service and to think of these networks and to cooperate with each other better. And one of the problems is that we kind of in a national level, even in politics, we kind of put that the train companies are as much as the most reliable advisors of the train traveling also. So in a way, we asked from the companies that how would you improve the train traveling in this area, but they are actually not the specialists. They are they are specialists, but they have their own interests. So when we come to that, for example, one thing that why don't we have here some like a traveling between the Sweden and Finland border? One reason what might be behind is that like if the train goes over the border, then it can and it must be put under competition, that like who is running the line. So in a way, if Finnish VR is not going over the border, they have the monopoly, they don't have to compete. But if they put it to Luleå, then it needs to go for open market. Like who's gonna run the line between Luleå and Helsinki? Is that their interest? No, it's not their interest. And politicians kind of like buy that like, hey, we should ask them like how to run these things. And then we take it as granted. So that kind of things. But EU Commission should kind of like do the changes, but the problem is that the national level politicians ask mostly from their companies, and then they are like, yeah, we shouldn't do that, and there is only a few of like enough expertise among politicians on the matter. The second thing is about Finland is an island, especially now when the new Iron Curtain is coming over here, like by rail traveling, like we are an island over here. And so on, like from Finnish perspective, how to improve train traveling quite fast would even be that like from the ferries from Turku, that like even the trains would be synchronized with the train, like the ferries. At this moment, if you want to go take the train to Copenhagen, you can take the train to Turku city, but it doesn't take you always to the harbor, and then it's not probably well synchronized always there, and then when in the Stockholm side, like how to synchronize the trains to Copenhagen or further, there is with the little adjustments you could do quite a lot. And also the other where you could probably do this kind of synchronization is the Umeå-Vaasa lines over here, that you could like take that, like the trains to Vaasa to Umeå could be also synchronized, but it's kind of like this kind of small adjustments that could be done quite fast and before we get the Rail Baltica and perhaps in the future the Tallinn-Helsinki tunnel, which takes 10 billion euros, and here is with this Rail Baltica, it's as like John said, there is like even some things are under construction, but at this moment Rail Baltica CEO resigned this winter. There is some land disputes going on that they don't get the land from the landowners. They are like, oh no, you cannot like build the rails here. So it's estimated to be 2026. But let's put it more like 36 or something like that. But so that's why, in a way, the short-term decisions are important, and to do the adjustments and everything that you could have that from Finland, like that you can do the train traveling. But then the third thing is the Rail Baltic Sea. That in a way you need to have big visions to make the big rail projects. And big visions in a sense that you need the tracks, but also that you get this kind of like connection between everything, connection between like the big cities and all that. And one thing that we have been in a small group thinking of that like when we have been speaking of Helsinki Tallinn and Helsinki to Berlin night trains, but in a sense we should actually be speaking in Finland more or less Rail Baltic Sea. That we have at this very moment, we have already a night train from Stockholm to Berlin, but why wouldn't you have a night train from Berlin to Stockholm at the same time? Like in a way that as you said, it would solve like a few important or like tricky questions with the cross-border trains, but in a way that would be a big vision to connect all the major cities around the Baltic Sea together with two night trains going around like there's no piercer all the time, like around opposite directions. So in a way you could like take the train in Tampere and wake up in Hamburg, for example, or something like that. So but that should be kind of the vision to go more forward. Yeah. that's about it. So EU Commission law changes we need, and there's the role is that national politicians have the big role there also, because they are kind of like all the time like going against with the Commission and like how to go forward and what's the role of the national rail companies. So we need to take the power with that to the people, not the rail companies. That's probably the most important and the most fast way to improve a lot of these things between the borders in all Europe. But then I'll give it to Inari. Go ahead.
Hey, so I'll talk quickly of the user perspective or like a consumer perspective of traveling from the island of Finland towards Europe. Yes, I have it here. Yes, so it's in Finnish, but I'll talk in English. We are, we founded my name is Inari, I'm an architect by background, so I do this as a very, as a traveler who wants to travel climate friendly, because it has been so difficult to find the information. We started organizing these events for what would be the proper English translation of like no fly traveling or travel on the ground, or in Finnish we have a term called like traveling overland.
Overland travel.
Yeah.
Or there's the stay grounded campaign in some countries. So
yeah, well, the term, and in Finnish we have a really nice term called maata pitkin that we talk about. And about this like overland travel phenomenon in Finland, just to make clear that there's a lot of different actors and it's a quite free form. The honor of founding this really great group of maata pitkin matkustajat in Finland goes to Santeri Junttila, and there's a group of enthusiastic admins in the group, and Jussi, maybe in the end of the presentation you can fill in if there's some gaps in my presentation of the history part, because you've also been an active part of that. Good. And then there's been an inspiration from the Nordic groups. There's a really, the Finnish group of overland travelers has maybe 30,000 people in it, but the Swedish one has 130,000 in it. So of course, we're kind of telling that Finland is an island, it's much more difficult. So then of course it's a lot easier, maybe that way more popular. But it's also nice to follow the Norwegian and the Danish groups. So we were a group of 5 to 10 people organizing these like overland travel fairs, and then we've also started this overland consulting agency of helping people sharing this information as it is so bloody difficult. And then I recommend everybody to follow also Tommi Tolkki on Twitter. She's sharing a lot of good information about train travels, and of course there's the classic, this seat man on the seat 61. Maybe quickly thinking how then the overland traveling from Helsinki looks like from my perspective or like personal experiences, are kind of like there's the circles of 1, 2 and 3 travel days. So kind of where you can get kind of easily within 1 or 2 or 3 days. So then for example a recipe for a skiing holiday, or kind of maybe if you'd aim to go somewhere near the Alps, that would work with that pattern of like traveling 2 days, then staying in the destination for 5, and then traveling for another 2 days. Of course, depends how you organize it, or if you can sleep well in the night trains. But kind of overland travel from Finland isn't impossible, but it requires a little more effort, and then also like rethinking the traveling a little bit so that you also make it enjoyable. Plan a nice lunch visit in Copenhagen, or kind of enjoy the whole trip instead of just the destination. Then we curated for the city of Helsinki, wanted to share the information of how to travel overland to Helsinki. So then we created like 5 different roads to Helsinki, and also tried to estimate the carbon emissions of the different options. So you can find this from this great website My Helsinki, and they have it in Finnish and English. But then that's always a big discussion, and you can't really give absolute figures for the carbon emissions for the boat. There was a professor of the University of Tallinn, and then she read a really nice blog saying that there's 19 ways of distributing the emissions between the passengers and then the load in the ship. So you can't really kind of give an exact figure of 18 grams of kilograms, but that's what the Finnlines company who's operating the ship between Helsinki and Travemünde is giving themselves, so we chose that one. But you see, for example, between Stockholm, of course, between Stockholm and Turku, it's a lot shorter. We have the most reliable estimate that I've heard is something around 30, and we tried to put them a little bit higher than some people say that it's only 12 or 10, but yeah, maybe that's also a nice discussion to have, like how to actually say, but that's what we try to make out of the different ways of coming to Helsinki. Also, Tommi Tolkki has created a really nice graph in Twitter of like the basic road through Sweden, kind of departing from Helsinki on a Friday, for example, at 5:37, then taking the train to Turku, make sure you catch one that goes into the harbor, then taking the boat, it arrives brutally early, 6:30, but then this one allows you to catch the train and actually pay attention, because now I think this summer this is 8:21, so be careful with the 4 minutes, and then arriving to Hamburg at 8. So kind of, yeah, thinking of the one travel day, so you can reach kind of Hamburg and then maybe Berlin at 10 p.m. the same night. So this is, and then if taking a night train, then kind of Zurich is then reachable by morning, and then Barcelona takes another day. There isn't a sky scanner, but I like Rome to Rio quite a lot. So this is basically the kind of the different options that you can find from there, and also somehow I've usually bought an Interrail ticket, but you can also buy the tickets from there. Well, then this is my and my boyfriend's planning for this summer, because it is complicated. I don't know if I didn't used to plan my summer trips in Excel, but now
we've been there.
Yeah. But now kind of we bought the Interrail tickets with this 50% discount now, and then hope to travel for the summer. And I think also for architects it's extremely. Of course, we also create emissions by traveling, but I think for it's essential kind of going outside from Finland, learning from different places, seeing, like physically experiencing different buildings or public squares. So I hope to make it climate friendly as possible, but this is still a process underway. Let's see where we'll go. Apparently it has been really crowded in the trains. And then I thought this is also quite fun. There's she's Vivi Lönn. She's the first female architect to start her own architecture office about 100 years ago in Finland, and she was also a very eager overland traveler, so it has been also kind of nice. There's a big exhibition about her, because it's now her 150th birthday, I think, big exhibition in the Architecture Museum, and she, aged 25 to 66, she made almost 40 different overland travel trips. So it has been a really, and also had this really great scrapbook of kind of her travels. So she has been a great.
This map is wonderful.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And it says like, yeah, we took the Sud Express from Madrid to Paris, like straight away. So then Vivi is kind of an inspiration. Like if she could do all these travels 100 a year with those conditions, like I think we can also do it. And then of course, if we want to have this historical perspective, I think the trains are also a mode of the future, but it's been nice. And then also because she has kept this really nice scrapbook, which is now actually visible in the Museum of Architecture. She has created, like saved all these receipts. And then from like circular economy point of view as an architect, I think it's also fantastic that you can book this same hotel. It has changed its name, but you can still find it in Copenhagen. And then there's, for example, a restaurant in Copenhagen that still exists, a lot of those. So as an architect, it's also very inspiring, like what kind of buildings have been lived up to the same task for 100 years, or like how to design also buildings to work so well. But this is underway, but I've created another Excel for Vivi's sheet, so if anybody is more interested of this, so I'd be happy to share that information.
Seems that she also travels through Haaparanta, Oden, and
yeah, it's actually fantastic, because kind of like the thing of like kind of always like which of these roads that I'm taking like so many times already I should take, and then like looking at her notes from there, like she had the same problem, like kind of like always having to go to Helsinki with the same roads. Cool, but yeah, so the planning is now underway and hopefully we'll go for the next Interrail. And then with this presentation, there's also, I took Jalka's map straight away and saved it. There was a good article in Helsinki Sanomat about the night trains this summer I collected. So I'm happy to share this presentation if anybody is interested. We try to keep all kinds of material. There's the night trains that you might find for this summer. This could be a dream to take, and I think it's also nice for branding of train traveling that there are like this super luxury offers. I think yes. Yeah.
£17,500.
Exactly. Yeah. It's crazy. That's the boat. That's very expensive. There's also interesting boat connections. Of course, they have there a lot greater emissions than taking the train, and of the costs and emissions, and then a lot of links of where to find more information.
A lot.
Cool. And then maybe I'll end with Jaakko's idea, because we a few years ago with Arto Sivonen, who runs a communications agent Mondag, Arto was running the project, so we curated for the the travel fair in Helsinki, kind of like there's different overland travel roads. So this was the one we've been also dreaming of, kind of like really it should be a proper tourist thing to do, kind of like going around the Baltic Sea, and then what's really crazy is that you'll get like, I don't know, 10 capitals within the same night train that you mentioned that you can go. So I think that would, I don't know, now also when the weathers are getting hotter and things, so kind of it could be a really nice way of spending your summer, I think, taking this route. Thank you.
We're more or less doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm halfway through this.
Yeah, excellent. I have, how do we, should we go on for a discussion or
exactly, let's chat, and if there are any people watching on the live stream, also, if you want to ask us questions, pose us the questions on Twitter, and I'll just mention me at John Worth, and I will I'll do my best to answer then in the video.
I can watch the live chat also on YouTube.
Oh right, okay, yeah. If anyone happens to post something there, yeah, okay. But anyway, come over and join us, Jaakko, and then there's whatever questions or comments or thoughts or reflections from those around in the room or online. Go for it.
Maybe one on the Baltic states that Rail Baltica obviously would be a game changer. The tunnel is a very, very long project if it will ever happen. So I think the solution would then be to put emphasis on the ship traffic, which has been dense, especially pre-COVID and so forth, and also obviously the connections to the harbors. They're not that far away from the centers, especially in Helsinki. And in Tallinn, the Rail Baltica station would be at Ülemiste at the airport, actually, which is, well, there we are again, flying. But in wait of that, as you said, it's a long project, and it will, I'm looking forward to what you find about it in your next days of travel. And let's hope it will come sooner than 36, I hope. And then also the day train, the night train to Warsaw, Berlin, Vienna from Tallinn. Very nice. Giving an alternative to the Sweden route, because one does get bored of it on the same AC train, the same very bad DSB train every time you want to go somewhere in Central Europe. So now Berlin and anywhere east of it would be through the Baltics, or even further west if Rail Baltica comes. But before that, running through express train on existing stock on existing tracks, meaning the diesel train basically. No, I don't think it has any technical hinders. There's only political and insight and will. And the story that got inspired in the Maanapimpi-matkustavat Facebook group, and we wrote the editors in Helsinki Sanomat that got actually published with it just when COVID started, so timing wasn't great. But guys knowing the technology better than I do estimated that 8 hours Tallinn to Kaunas.
Yeah.
And then the train that has more or less existed and should be getting a bit faster and better between Białystok and Kaunas and then further to Warsaw. Connecting to that, you would, if the boat schedule works well, getting very early ship from Helsinki, then the train from Tallinn, you would be in Kaunas for the evening.
Yeah.
Or if not earlier, overnight there. The next day you would be afternoon in Warsaw or evening in Berlin, or then take the night train from Warsaw and be in the morning in Vienna and so forth. So that would already be a very big improvement. But then I heard that the Latvian government wants very high fees on the use of their rail infrastructure compared to some other countries. And what Jaak said about the EU funding, I think Estonia's example is interesting because I think they all share the same Soviet history of railways, that the railway is not a modern thing, it's something of the past, it's communism, it's all this, we don't want it. So what Estonia did is they replaced all of their passenger rolling stock with Swiss flirt trains and the first diesel flirts as well. And so they got it on the rise. So it has a very a more positive swing nowadays. Latvia hasn't managed to do the same at all, I understand. And basically, one should go and ride those trains because I think it was the diesel ones, so the national, not the Tallinn local traffic trains that EU funded 80% of. So as an EU citizen, you should go there because it's your money as well. But I think it's money good use. Sorry, long comment.
So that's all correct, but there are a couple of other headaches with that, right? So the EU now justifiably will not fund diesel trains anymore. So it did fund the Estonian ones, but Latvia didn't get on and order anything soon enough, and has now got a problem that it doesn't know what the hell it can order. So the I'm meeting a long-time contact there in Riga to get to the bottom of that one. Now, what you do have also in those places, so you have the same technical standards in all three, but as a result of them being EU member states in the technical pillar of the fourth railway package, those countries have chosen to only okay their new trains only for operation in one of the three. So the Estonian trains you could run through the whole way to Lithuania from a technological point of view, or the new ones that the Lithuanians have got, you could run the whole way to Tallinn from a technological point of view, but they do not have yet the legal permission to do so. And the national railway companies have no intention of doing that, meaning the only stock which has the legal permission to run through dates from pre-1989. So you could solve, again, that one, the EU proved it, that you can run a Lithuanian train the whole way to Tallinn, because it had the Connecting Europe Express, which was a Lithuanian train, but running with special permission all the way to Tallinn. Now, you could take that as your basic standard and replicate that. Now, what you've got hanging around in Riga, which offers an opportunity, is all of the night trains that used to run the Riga to Kiev route through Belarus, which of course you can't run anymore. So they've got a bunch of perfectly good, albeit slightly old-fashioned trains, parked up doing nothing. So you could realistically run an 8-hour, and I've come up with the same number and checked it with experts, an 8-hour Tallinn, Riga, Kaunas, Vilnius, you could run comparatively easily, which would be competitive, time-wise, with the bus on the same route.
Especially comfort.
And much more comfortable. And then the situation on Kaunas to Białystok, that's one of my biggest headaches with regard to Rail Baltica. I'll sod it, I guess they're not watching the screen. I got myself in hot water talking about this. The Poles are reassuring Rail Baltica that everything is fine and everything is on track with the upgrading of the bit from the Polish-Lithuanian border through to Warsaw. I am not at all sure, right? I have seen very, very little evidence that that is even in hand. So you could have the situation that Tallinn through to Kaunas is even mostly built, and it gets to the other side of the border and it's still diesel with a maximum speed of 80 km/h. They've not even built a cut-off line at Suwałki, the first main town on the Polish side, which would just basically facilitate the freight. So Poland's commitment, so we were talking about when one side wants it more than the other side, and Poland doesn't seem to give a damn about Rail Baltica, whereas the Baltic states do to some extent, and they need it more than Poland does, but Poland has to play on the infrastructure game as well. And to me, that's a big headache, potentially. There's another one you didn't mention as well. they're building a railway line, but they don't know what trains are going to run on it, which is a bit of an error. Because if it is to open in some parts of it opening in 2026, 2027, if you want to buy 250 km/h trains to run, you need to start ordering them now because all of the order books of all the manufacturers are full. Now, if they don't get around to fixing that, they just say, hey, the market will fix it. Well, yeah, the market is not very good at fixing really complicated railway problems, so I'm not holding my breath that the market alone will simply fix that.
And which markets, in a way, with this national railways?
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. But when who? You need an operator to make the order,
Exactly.
and they've not got an operator, right? What are they expecting? Flixtrain to step in or something like? Yeah, I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, and it would be of strategic interest to us as well among the Baltic states.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a geopolitically really important project. But each of those railways has so many of their own complexities and difficulties. It's really messy.
And I think it's ironic that the only one who actually managed to run an international train through these EU countries was Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, the only international train currently, until 1st of July, Lithuania's only international train is the transit train from Minsk to Kaliningrad, which still runs, right?
Yeah.
So operated by Russian railways, and they've hung up posters. We'll try and take pictures of it in Vilnius station. So when the train goes slow through Vilnius station, Russian passengers in the train see pictures of the Russian atrocities in out of the train window.
So it actually doesn't stop.
It doesn't stop. It just goes through slow. It doesn't stop. Yeah.
It was this week I thought that like they stopped that, like it's not allowed anymore to work or something. I saw news of that.
Okay, because it's actually regulated by an international treaty that it's supposed to run. So maybe Lithuania just says, okay, we're happy to be in breach, but okay.
Probably something like that. But one thing what I'm also thinking over there that like because the international like traveling has been so difficult with that like a overborder like a from our border aspect, that could we find somehow the solution from like a commuter Ulaya area comes quite interesting, and then you find the locals interested of that of the improving the train like traveling quite a lot, and through that kind of like proceedings you could get the infrastructure and in a way the proceedings to work, and then it's easier to in a way implement that, like, hey, if we want to do there something like a larger or like more long distance kind of things. Same here with the Rail Baltica here, that like we're not either like really like holding our breaths with the tunnel nor the Rail Baltica, but the idea that you could actually have like a Tampere, Helsinki, Tallinn kind of like a commuter train area that you could actually like put together to put together those three cities in one train, like it can give you some kind of like local boosts that would need that you don't have to kind of like solve all the problems at the same time, and it takes like decades.
Right. Yeah, you can make an Öresund out of Tampere, Helsinki, Tallinn. Basically.
Exactly.
Öresund effect.
Yeah, exactly.
No, because that's also really important, is that it's totally transformed the relationship between Malmö, and the bridge has transformed the relationship between Malmö and Copenhagen. Now, you could potentially transform that relationship between Helsinki and Tallinn in the same way.
Exactly.
Although the geographic or geological headaches are of a greater scale of complexity.
But it's the most used, like the ship road, I think, at the moment in the world, between Helsinki and Tallinn, like when you take the passengers, daily passengers.
Top ones anyway.
Yeah, top ones.
Sicily and mainland Italy
might.
And Calais, but they are. There is very like a lot of like a commuting, like just basic commuting.
Basically, on tunnel, double the length of the channel tunnel, and all the problems financing that.
Yeah, exactly.
And the geology is pretty good. I mean, I think it's past halfway. So then it's kind of Finnish geology, and Estonia is basically a completely different one.
Okay.
So then it will come harder the further south you go. But it's a 100-kilometer tunnel would be.
Yeah. But one of the. Or did you want to?
No, go.
But the other thing, of course, what we are having the problem here with Finland and the Baltics are the gauge problem. That John was also mentioning, that like we have just happened to have the different kind of weight, like the weight of the gauges tracks, but I dig back to this problem that like how could you like do you have to kind of change the trains always like because that would be a big like a problem or like a disadvantage in a way, but apparently there is in Europe there is not one area where you have that kind of problem or like a similar thing that like in Portugal and Madrid there is the difference between the wide of the tracks and so they use this kind of like coach changers that the train just like slows down a bit. It goes like 20 kilometers per hour through a coach changer, and it changes in a way that on the way, like you don't hop off. It just like changes the width, and then it continues, and it can be a high-speed train.
Well, like they have done, or actually I think they changed the bogies in Brest on the Russian sleepers before the war.
Okay.
That came into to Nice and Paris and Berlin.
Yeah.
But the ones with the gauge changing wheels, the Russian railways did have a few. They ran on the Paris, Berlin, Moscow service. So they bought the Spanish technology for running that service.
Yeah.
Now the problem then comes is you can do that, but there are only 2 or 3 manufacturers of that technology at the moment, and some competing technologies too. So medium term perhaps, but what I'd rather is that we try to find at least the best viable short-term solutions that would work. Now, it would be lovely if you had a Rovaniemi to Stockholm train with the gauge-changing wheels, so it could run the whole way through. But let's not get carried away.
Not next year.
Not next year.
As you said, the Haaparanta infrastructure is.
It's really nice for a crossing, right? So I'm always fine if you have to change trains. Okay, sometimes it's a bit frustrating, sometimes, but if the infrastructure is organised so as to facilitate and make it really easy, just cross the platform and take the next train, then I can live with that.
And it's more than 1,000 kilometer journey from Rovaniemi to Stockholm. So
Right.
So that
you have to do that with the night
change
train.
1 or 2 times is not too much.
Yeah.
Changing 5 times then,
Yeah.
You had a question, or?
Yes, what is the incentive for an operator to get out of their comfort market and sort of invest in another? And let's just take an example. Like, let's say if we have the minister who's in charge of the state ownership here in Finland, or the CEO of VR, and you say like, okay, so what needs to change so that you will run trains on Rail Baltica, let's say, or even the old one, but just as an exercise, a mental exercise, what needs to change? Thanks.
Those railway companies mostly have a very low incentive to go outside of their own home market. VR's incentive is pretty low, right? I think VR did try to bid for some contract in Sweden or Norway at some point.
I think they got one actually.
Okay.
In Sweden, was it?
Yeah. So each national railway company, or many of them, are realizing there are international opportunities to bid for contracts in other places, so using their expertise. So the slightly strange thing was the only train I took uniquely in Norway was run by the Swedes, and 3 of the trains I took in Sweden were run by the Norwegians, right? So there is a bit of this kind of, I've got this expertise here, I can apply it somewhere else, right? And so VR can potentially do that, right? So there are some railways that want to do that. The ones that have been most successful at it are particularly Trenitalia, that's been running it's bought up some small companies and it's been running regional trains in Germany, for example. And it's also identified that actually, if you muscle in on the market of another big player in a neighbouring country, you can sometimes make a tremendous success of it. So the Italian trains now running, competing against French run trains on Milan to Paris. The Italian ones are more comfortable with a better timetable, better prices, and surprise, surprise, they're really good, and therefore they do really well. And suddenly SNCF, faced with that competition, thinks, oh shit, we better up our game and improve what we're doing. Now, so there are some examples where you basically go, here is a market opportunity, let's go there and try and win that market, right? That's happening somewhat, right? Depends on the company. Where there really is not much of a market, although this sounds contradictory, right, is actually running the cross-border bit, right? You might want to go and run trains only in Sweden, but no one wants to run the Sweden-Norway line, right? Because that is that much more difficult or that much more complex. Now, what the EU has said is for long-distance cross-border passenger travel, it is a free market. Anyone can bid for paths, but no one is bidding for paths, right? So the only company that's kind of half cracked it is among the private ones is the Czech company RegioJet that runs trains from Czechia to Slovakia to Austria and to Hungary, right? So they're basically saying, hey, we've got trains that are interoperable, we'll just go there, right? But they're basically the only one that's seen a directly market opportunity in an international route, right? Train Italia a bit, but it's a very specific case. So what you would, of course, do as any railway company is you go for the kind of lowest hanging fruit, like the easiest things you could solve. And the easiest things to solve are not very often international connections. Right? Now, what could the EU do about this? Right? First, buying an interoperable train, so one that you can run into another country, costs more than buying one that you can run in only one country. Not much more, but a bit more. Could the EU set up a kind of interoperable rolling stock fund, which would dedicated basically pay the difference? If you're investing in a new train, by default you buy one that you can operate into the neighbouring country, right? So that would be one opportunity. Second, I've been advocating for quite some time now putting a ban on scrapping trains. So if you would basically say, if you're a national operator, rather than scrapping your 30-year-old train, you have to put it up for sale, which would basically allow what basically RegioJet has done in Czech Republic. They bought old Austrian trains and they put them on Czech to Slovak routes. Now, the difficulty is they can't get those old trains because most of the time the state railways would sooner scrap them than sell them to someone else.
That happens here.
Right,
That happens a lot.
Right, yeah. So the French are the worst of it, so if you did those two changes, that might also help, because the railways keep on towards Brussels going, we need more money for interoperability, while at the same time the railways themselves take non-interoperable decisions. The Danes have just ordered a fleet of new passenger locomotives that they decided to not add the Swedish signalling system to them, despite the fact they can accept the Swedish electrification system, right? So you've basically got, oh shit, we haven't got enough trains that we can run across the bridge to Malmö because we ordered the non-interoperable ones, right? Now, railways are full of bad decisions like that. So the European Union could potentially intervene to help smooth that a bit. Yeah? But what I'm also learning from this is there are some good and some bad state operators, and there's some good and some bad private operators. It is definitely not possible to say private good and state bad or vice versa, right? There are some really healthy ones in both and some really rotten ones in both camps.
Actually, no.
Wait, move on.
Sorry.
No,
just
from
a-
another topic, so
Sorry, a short comment on that. That we, in our writing with Mikko Laaksonen and others about the Baltic thing, just when COVID was starting, was that why not we are good? Why couldn't it run the trains? Technically it could.
Yeah, it could.
They have EU acceptance. We of course know they won't. It was a slight provocation,
Yeah.
but now they have less of those coaches than they had 2 years ago because they've been scrapping them.
Right.
Coaches that are still running fine in Sweden.
Yeah.
Not the fanciest, but quite doable, and given that they were in the Finnish case, and I think in many other cases, bought by the state authority, which wasn't a company even yet, not even a state-owned company, then they're more of a kind of national interest, at least morally, if not legally.
Exactly the same in France. Exactly the same.
I mean, a bad case scenario could be that Rail Baltica is built, but it's 3 segments and nothing runs into it, which would be crazy. But
Or it runs first of all with freight, right? Before they actually get the passenger trains running. That's possible.
There's actually a freight train from Mikkeli to China, but I don't remember like which city, but there is a freight connection now.
Right.
One. But how much should we actually develop train traveling? Because then there's so much talk about electrical planes or biofuel, or like ocean-produced biofuel product, or kind of like, because the train or building new railways has also this huge like material footprint. So then like in 20 years or 30 years, or like I've been thinking that maybe in the 2030s, or to my understanding, we would have kind of non-carbon fossil producing airlines. So what's your thinking kind of within the next 50 years? So like if train traveling will still be a valid way of moving around?
So if you compare based on the technology we've got, right, not with planes, because we don't know exactly how energy intensive electric planes are ultimately going to be, but if you look at electrification of a bus fleet or electrification of a car fleet or running an electric train is still a better bet because your power source is external, it's the cable. You are not shipping around the battery with you. So it's still going to be an immensely efficient way of getting people around, even when you've electrified pretty much everything else, right? So that's the first. The second is I agree with that point about some places you might need new lines, but I'm very skeptical about a number of the different projects of building new lines in different parts of Europe, because I think the rationale is not a clear and logical one, right? So France is currently having this argument about building a new line between Bordeaux and Toulouse, because they say Toulouse is the most flown flight route. Toulouse to Paris is the most flown flight route. We need a new line Bordeaux to Toulouse so people will take the train. Well, look at the timetable. The first morning train from Toulouse goes at 6:30. It stops in 4 or 5 interim stations, which means it's not the fastest way you could use the infrastructure. So of course it gets to Paris too late, right? Now, you could produce a much better service for business travellers using the existing infrastructure to allow it to better to compete with the plane. Now, we have the situation that what we've got to do, and there's behind the scenes of this cross-border rail project, is what's the best you can do with the infrastructure that you've got, right? Now, there are some parts of Europe where the infrastructure is knackered and they're making the best of it, right? And there are other parts of Europe where you've got impeccable or comparatively good infrastructure, which you're making really bad use of, right? Now, and so my point would then be essentially to say is, when we've got to the stage where we're making the very best use of the infrastructure we've got, then we talk about what new lines we may potentially need. But in many parts of Europe, we're not got there yet. Now, let's also, relating to that, just talk about timetables. The situation is that it feels like everything in southwestern Europe has not learned how to build a good train timetable, right? Finland has an excellent train timetable, right? So what you call in German a Taktfahrplan basically means, or a clock-face timetable in English, a train that departs at the same minute every hour, all day, from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m., meaning that how your life changes, the train can cope with it, and the next train comes around in 1 hour. There are parts of Spain where you have 2 trains a day on a regional line, right? There is the towns of Huesca and Zaragoza. They are 70 kilometers apart. The train is a 200-kilometer-an-hour line, and there are branches of Zaragoza University in both places, and they run 7 trains only in a day. They run a bus every half an hour, all day through, and the bus lasts twice as long. Right? Now, even with an electric bus, you're still not going to get much better, right? Now, why are they not running? If this were Germany, they'd be running a train every 30 minutes or every 15 minutes there, right? So you've got to get that right. Now, what's really missing, and that's what I want to do with this project and why discussions like this are really important, which is basically to say, what works somewhere else in Europe that you could basically apply somewhere else and say, okay, look, why don't you apply a German-style timetable to Huesca Zaragoza, and you might actually have a good solution. You know? And so it's a bit of a messy answer, but that's essentially how I would answer it.
Would you turn, or I try to turn, what would you require of turning like more of the grey lines into red ones? So would be actually needed, and Jaakko, if you go a little bit lower, for example, Madrid and Barcelona has even this pink line.
Yeah,
so kind of, how would that change Europe, and how big of a like material environmental footprint would that have of changing like the colors of the lines?
So the purple's what, over 300, right? And those are mostly 320. Yeah, exactly. And the environmental impact really changes when you in the 280 to 350 range, right? For the building of the lines, right? So please, anyone watching this, if you're British, don't troll me. The British have had this argument about the British high-speed line HS2, right? Now, it is, in my view, an over-engineered project because it's to run at a design speed of 350 kilometers an hour. That means your curves have to be super gentle, which means you need loads of bridges and loads of tunnels in order to manage to avoid everything, houses, nature reserves, you name it, which increases your environmental footprint of the building of the line. Right now, if you build a line to 250 to 300 kilometers an hour, it isn't anywhere near as complicated. So those ones, for example, Paris-Strasbourg, if you've ever taken it, apart from the last bit of Strasbourg, it's really boring because basically it's pretty much just straight down over a flat load of fields, basically. Right now, there you can build a high-speed line super easily. But when your topography gets complicated, then building beyond 300 km/h becomes very, very complicated. So the ones that for me are, well, then you've got to ask yourself the question: where legitimately could you argue that some of those sorts of things are potentially missing? Now, some of the stuff that to me is very weak in Central Europe is like some of these connections here from basically central Germany through to Czech Republic and Poland, right? So try going from Frankfurt via Nuremberg to Prague, for example, right? That ought to be a really easy connection, and it's actually nightmarishly bad. So there are some there that there could be opportunities. Now, what you could also do if you wanted to be really transformative as well is to build high-speed night trains, because basically the one that I've looked at a lot is Paris routing around this way to Barcelona, which is 6 hours 40 on daytime trains, and you see there's a bit of high-speed infra is missing here. But basically 6 hours 40 on daytime trains, so if they ran a better timetable, you could reduce it to 6 hours very easily. But that's still too long, right? And even if you complete this bit, it's still going to be at least 5 hours. Now that would be an ideal route for a night train, and then if you routed it to Madrid, you basically Paris-Madrid on a high-speed night train becomes then viable. No? But but there are some of these ones, and people go, well, John, no one's ever going to be taking the train from Berlin to Lisbon. Yeah, it's probably true, right? But there are many more routes of that sort of length that you could achieve with a few gaps in the infrastructure field and a better through service, I think.
I would add to that like in France, the TGV network, exactly like it's built completely separate from the other like rail tracks mostly, and it's something that in France the length of the routes are quite long in a way that it gives you the advantage with the high speed, but it really put the prices higher, and in a way I would put more of the energy for exactly that like you wouldn't have the super expensive TGV on rails, but in a way to improve the old ones. But at the same time, you have to of course like to check how it works. Like for example here, in Helsinki, Tampere, and Helsinki Oulu basically has been is under debate at the moment that we would like to make the more high-speed train. That is it should we just leave the old tracks there for the commuter trains, because we would need in a way to, when we want to improve the commuter trains in Finland, which we don't have outside of Helsinki area a lot, because it's illegal at the moment basically for the cities to run it. So in a way, then would it be more efficient to build it separately? But I think when it comes to that would it lower the emission? Then it's also what would be the alternative? And what you asked in origin, that would it be like the electric planes or something like that? Yeah.
Do you think the trains will be the most viable way of traveling in 2040s?
Very difficult to say, but when you look for very long distances, there will be planes, I think, because if you the physics come against if you want to put the trains to go even faster, then you would need maglevs, and they cost a lot, fortune in a way. So it's more better way to use that resources probably for something else than trains and trying to reduce the emissions there than and do something else with that. But maglevs are they are now building in Japan the long maglev, if I understood.
We had also also the Indian perspective, or like this is kind of what I've been
Yeah, exactly.
kind of dreaming, and I think it's downloaded from the Rail Baltic website, or like I think it's nice that they're showing like how it's connecting like not only Europe but the rest of the world.
But there's also an interesting thing from the study in Germany of the traffic change when they reduced the Munich to Berlin trip time from 6 hours to 4 hours, of how that massively increased the market share for trains on that route. So to me, you're basically, I was thinking these kind of questions of a 2, 4, and 6 hour plan. 2 hours is basically train competes with car, and if the experience is better and actually indeed it's quicker than driving, train can do quite well. 4 hours, train is competing with car and plane on most of those routes. Again, train can achieve a solid market share if the service is good, the experience is good, and indeed it's faster than a car, and you can avoid the messing around at an airport. 6 hours is when it starts to get tricky for a train, right? Because people don't want to sit for more than 6 hours normally on a train. And so therefore you need to make sure that you really improve your train service to make sure that the experience on board is extremely good. The Swedes, it seems, are impeccable at this, right? Swedish X2000 train is like, you could sit in that for 6 hours without any problem. There are certain trains, I wouldn't want to sit for 6 hours in TGV in France, honestly, because in terms of the kind of comfort or how kind of confined you are in it. And then if it's above 6 hours, then you should be looking to run night trains instead. Now, the really interesting thing is if you look at this is only international flights, not national flights, right? If you look at the 10 most flown short-haul international flight routes in Europe, only one of the top 10 has a comparative train route of more than 7 hours, right? That is Madrid to Lisbon. Yeah? The others, I've done it in 7 hours rather than 6, probably. The others, 4 have train routes of 3 hours or less, and the other 5 are in the 4 to 7 hour bracket, right? So the really flown international flight routes are actually in Europe really short, right? Which sounds a bit insane, yeah? So when people say to me, well, no one's going to fly from Berlin to Lisbon, well, not many people are flying from Berlin to Lisbon, right? Now, so what you can then essentially do is on those routes, you can then step up your trains comparatively easily, right? Paris to Frankfurt, right, by train, is quite a mess. There's not an early one, there's not a late one, it's every 2 hours, booking it is a bit of a mess. Also, like, my partner works for a company where they have an obligation of if the train is 4 hours or less, they have to take the train rather than flying. But it doesn't apply internationally. So all her colleagues fly from Frankfurt to Paris, but take the train from Frankfurt to Berlin, right? Which is just insane if you think about it, right? So if you work on that, right, then you've got real opportunity. But then again, when back to the question of who wants to, right, or who could, right? To try and, this famous map, anyway, the proposed night train, this is a map proposed by the German Green Party, which went insanely viral. I wrote a whole analysis on my blog about this, about which of these routes were actually viable or not, and about 2/3 of them are viable. I know the dude that did the research for it, so of all of the potential night train plans, forget the British routes and forget the Portuguese routes, but most of the Central European routes are potential. I've done a lot of work on night trains before this project. The crux is you could technically run all of those, but no companies have got any carriages to operate any of them, and so therefore it won't happen. So you would need to find some company that was willing to scale up their offer in order to manage to run all of those lines.
What about these guys? Do you
There, it's
tell? Oh no! Oh no!
Just if you have finished that topic, I have a comment that I want
to
go
for it.
Just Sebastian from Train Tracks, you on Twitter is writing about whether competition or state-run enterprises will solve all of that, and he's arguing that international train travel will never be a low-hanging fruit except for seasonal traffic. Would you say that this is something that applies to the solutions you're thinking about right now?
No. And I know that Sebastian is rather a fan of state-owned railways and is a greater fan of state-owned railways than I am. I'm not necessarily a fan of private railways either, but
the low-hanging fruit argument.
No, the low-hanging fruit. There are all kinds of different low-hanging fruit, right? In some places, it's technically easy, but you don't know if there's a business model that works, right? That you might need state subsidy. In other places, there's clearly an opportunity, right? Now, the difficulty is you've got, you could easily run more trains on Frankfurt to Paris, right? How are you going to run more trains on Frankfurt to Paris? You can't really bung more public subsidy at Deutsche Bahn or SNCF because on that route they're supposed to be players in the open market. They're state-owned enterprises, but they're supposed to be cost-returning, right? So you shouldn't need a public service obligation to solve that problem, right? The private market or those companies themselves should be able to solve that problem, but they don't, right? So how do you solve that issue? Now, there are lots of cross-border services which are also applicable for non-tourists, right? Now, from Finland, it's a bit of a different topic, right? Because we're talking about massive journeys, which you take comparatively irregularly. In loads of places in Central Europe, those are things that you would take much more regularly, right? Between big cities which are 4 hours apart. And there, it's not that there aren't any trains. Most of the time there just aren't enough of them, and not according to a timetable which makes sense. So to me, the answer to that would be, the answer is it depends where, yeah? Not which. It's very important that whichever border it is or whichever connection it is, you need to find an appropriate solution for that individual case. Yeah, so I wouldn't be as general as that.
And what do you think about the Finnish-Swedish border you've seen yesterday? What kind of case is there?
So, to me, it has to be for the ideal opportunity, other than some potential cross-border commuters to Haparanda, but even that, I think the opportunity is comparatively low, because particularly the Swedish side has so comparatively few people until you get to Boden and Luleå. It has to be for long-distance travel, and it's probably going to be highly seasonal for winter or summer tourist purposes in the long distance. You can't solve that with an open market private solution. You need to basically solve that with some kind of public subsidy somehow, or with some public service obligations. So ultimately that's got to be one that requires state intervention. I can't see any way that just simply with a private operator, I don't know, a Flixtrain equivalent suddenly stepping in, I can't believe that that's going to come to pass, I'm afraid. So that's one where I would agree, but there are plenty of others where I don't necessarily agree. I'm aware that time's coming on, maybe we should draw to a close. Are there any further questions or comments?
Really happy about your project. Let's hope it will catch a lot of attention on it.
Well, so it should be now covered. I've got a bunch of calls now. Basically, the media attention to the project normally comes along after I've been to a country rather than when I'm in the country, which is a bit frustrating. So I've got a bunch of calls with Dutch journalists this afternoon. But the best one of all should be, all being well, it should be on Europa magazine, the kind of weekly show about European politics of ARD, the German public broadcaster, on 26th of June. So that should begin to kind of get the ball rolling. What's really interesting in the project is the places which are really the most stuck are often the places where there's the most attention. So like Portugal, for example, there's like so much debate and discussion already about it, which is kind of cool, and I know very little about Portuguese railways. But anyway, I'm very glad I can kind of get that going. I also realised from your plan, our paths may cross somewhere in your interrail. Let's try and see if we can kind of coordinate that exactly. But, and also generally as well, for anyone tuning in, if anyone's coming, people are welcome to come along for some legs, or people see something on Twitter, like there was this wonderful guy in Kleve at the border of Netherlands to Germany. He's like, I see on your project you're coming through Kleve. I'm going to meet you for a cup of coffee at the railway station. So this in a tiny station cafe comes and meets me and then says, oh, well, I explain to you what's going on. So those kind of things are really good. And I think the really, really important point is seeing it with your own eyes to make sense of the situation. It makes that much more interesting than if you just read something in a report in a book or a report from the Commission. And that's the really joy of this, and like kind of the photos and the videos and the conversations. That's the great aspect of it too. Right, on that note, let's conclude. Thank you very much indeed for coming, both of you, and thank you to Demos for hosting, and particularly thanks to Alina Kiski, my old friend, who basically helped organise the whole thing and isn't here because she's in Spain this week. Right, let's draw to a close. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
I'm stopping this too.
Yeah, stop it. Yeah, thank you.
Finish event.
Yeah, finish event. Yeah.